Yeah, we are back. It is episode 68 of the Metal Roundtable. I am Metal Rob, and with me, as always, is the great
Carcass John.
Okay, Donna. Before we get to you, we've got one quick thing that we have to get out of the way. Carcass always wears a shirt that I can't read, but I busted him on this one. That says Tomb Mold.
You are correct.
Okay, I win.
Ding, ding. I was going to wear the shirt in the background that some nice man in Hong Kong made, the Eddie Van Halen Frankenstrat paint job bowling shirt. But I just have to keep with the theme of the show, so bear with me. I've hung it in back, so that's my mad prop to the great Eddie Van Halen.
Rest in peace to the great Eddie Van Halen, of course. But let's bring this bad boy straight to business. If you don't know who we have with us today, shame on you, because the lady with us, the great Donna Halper, coming to us from Boston, discovered. Am I right? The great Donna Halper is with us. Halper, thank you for being with us.
Well, you pay me the big bucks, I show up. Am I right?
That's right. This is a high-dollar production, too.
I knew there was a price attached somewhere.
That's right.
Welcome to my messy office, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you for coming on with us. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed visiting with you a couple of days ago so that we could kind of get to know each other. And we're going to put the ball on the tee for you, and we are going to let you do this thing. I learned about you in the Beyond the Lighted Stage documentary, which is fantastic. That's where I found out who you were and what your business was with Rush. But just give us a quick rundown about how you got started in radio and tell us about jobs for women in radio then. And obviously we want to get to the bigger question.
Well, we can get to jobs for women in heavy metal, which is a whole nother conversation. But I personally, as an aside here, I've always felt there were a lot more women who liked metal and who liked hard rock than anybody ever used to think. People would always say, oh, Rush is a dude's band. I'm like, yes and no. Over the years, I saw more and more and more women coming in to Rush concerts, buying Rush tunes, getting in touch with me on social media. Used to be in the early days, probably they went because their boyfriend or their husband dragged them kicking and screaming. But as time went on, you could go to a concert and you would see a wide range of fans of all ages, including little kids whose parents had just kind of turned them on to it. So,
right.
But anyway, so once upon in a kingdom far away, many, many years ago, and then the dinosaurs came, and so I was born, they tell me, but I don't remember because I was very little. Okay. But when I was growing up, I had this really bizarre childhood. Bizarre as in I went from living in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood to living in a neighborhood where we were the only Jews in a time when there was still a lot of anti-Semitism in the culture. So that was not terribly fun, and I don't recommend it. But the other thing that was interesting was I knew from the time I was a kid that I wanted a career. Now, today, it's like, ho-hum yawn, you want a career. But in the 50s, it was very, very traditional, okay? And if you were female, you were supposed to be a teacher, a nurse, a secretary, and you were supposed to get married young and have babies. Didn't want to do any of those things, okay? Nothing against getting married, maybe someday, one day. But at the time, my only thing was I wanted a career and I wanted to be in the media. And I don't know where I got it from. I didn't have anybody on either side of my family that was in the media. I also didn't have anybody on either side of my family that was in a non-traditional occupation. My mother was a housewife because that's what women were back then. And I'm not saying anything against it. I'm just saying she wasn't given a lot of options. Okay. It was like, you're married, you have to quit your job, and that's the end of that. Nobody asked whether you wanted to or not. So I grew up in a pretty traditional background, and I always felt out of place. And the thing that made me feel better was listening to the radio. The thing that made me feel better was music. The thing that made me feel better was rock and roll. Okay. And I always loved rock and roll. Rob, did you find that as well? Did you have that? Because you're kind of gesturing at your Black Sabbath thingy. And I'm
absolutely.
like, yes.
Donna, I grew up the biggest radio fan that there was, specifically rock and roll radio. But I listened to those DJs like they were gods. And when I got my first cassette player, I recorded hours and hours and hours of radio. I loved it and was fortunate enough to do it for about 3 years up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It didn't last. But I did get to do radio. I was very proud of myself. I had a fun little show. So I, like you, yes, grew up loving radio, but please continue.
No, you're not interrupting me. I'm just saying this was an era when radio really mattered to people, that pre-internet era, okay? And today you got kids growing up that it's like, yeah, they've always been digital natives.
Right.
But in that era before the internet got into everybody's homes, I mean, I'm a media historian. The internet started being a thing in 1969, but nobody knew about it. It was designed for the military. And then in like the 1980s, a few colleges kind of linked up. Oh boy. But if you weren't in that group, you didn't know. It really wasn't until the 1990s that the internet started getting into people's homes. And prior to that, if you wanted to hear new music, it was radio. You relied on radio, and you'd get your like cassette player or your, CD player later on, vinyl back before that, and you couldn't wait for the new music. Did you know there used to be record stores back in the 30s, 40s, even into the 50s, where they'd let you come into the store and go into a listening booth and hear some of the new music and decide if you wanted to buy it. So music was a big part of my life. Now, my parents were into big band, so they kind of apprenticed me into like, oh yeah, here's the big bands. Wasn't my thing, but I'm glad that they introduced me to it, because years later I got to meet some of those performers, and I mean, what a privilege. But I always liked rock and roll from day one. And I got to be around in the 50s when rock and roll was still new, when it was still developing. And since I don't smoke or drink or do drugs, I actually remember those days. And
hey, me too.
There you go.
Me too.
So the DJs were like friends to me. And I just thought to myself, wow, what a cool job that would be. It would be so much fun to be on the radio, playing the hits, playing the tunes, introducing people to new music. I'd love to do that. And I had no idea that was a revolutionary thing to want, because girls were not welcome in top 40 radio. I mean, you could be a receptionist, you might be a music director, but in terms of getting on the air, evidently the republic would fall if there was a female voice on the air, I guess. I don't know, But I became, finally, after much effort and struggle, in 1968, I became the first woman in the history of Northeastern University to ever be on the radio, and the republic didn't fall, still here. And I gradually was able to embark upon a career that took me to Cleveland and New York City and Washington, D.C., and of course back to Boston. And then I started a consulting business and worked all over North America, and, I got to go to Hawaii, got to go to, Alaska, you name it, I worked there. And awesome. Met some fabulous people, met some famous people, met people like Springsteen and Bob Seger. And, the one person I didn't meet that I always kind of wished I could have was Ozzy. I told you this the other day when we were talking.
Yeah.
I always wished I could have met Ozzy, because I hear, and I'm not being sarcastic here. I mean, Ozzy has well-known problems with substances. Okay. It's not a big surprise, but I'm told when he's going through his period of being clean and sober, they don't make nicer people. I'm told he's just a really good guy. And I wished I could have met him. You know, I met ZZ Top. I mean, you know, you name them. If they existed in the 70s and 80s, the chances are real good I met them. And it was a lot of fun. And, you know, met some members of the Allman Brothers, I mean, etc. Fleetwood Mac, I think I mentioned. And, of course, discovered Rush. And that changed my life considerably. And I don't think I'd be talking to you wonderful folks if I hadn't done that. So there's that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what I would like to know, one of the things that people don't know, especially these days, and if you haven't ever done the radio business, which I was in it for a minute. But one of the things that I came to understand was how record labels service radio stations, meaning sending out releases before they come out and promos and all that kind of thing. So my curiosity, when the Rush record shows up, is that how it showed up? How did it fall to you? Just kind of take us through that.
Well, there were two ways to get music back then. There was the conventional route, which is you sign a contract with a record label, let's say RCA, okay? So you sign a contract with RCA. And when your new record comes out, the record promoter from RCA goes around to the major radio stations and brings a copy of the new record. Now, in some cases, they did it creatively. They had cute things they did. I remember there was a song called Skater Boy, and the promotion person came in on roller skates, you know, just to kind of call attention to Skater Boy, you know, that kind of thing. And in fact, I remember when Kiss had a song that was a dance music song called I Was Made for Loving You. Wonderful record. I'm sorry, even if you hate Kiss, that's a great song.
I love that song.
Wonderful on the radio. But by that time, Kiss was a really polarizing band. Some people liked the whole makeup thing. Some people didn't. And the record promoter was worried that radio stations would just automatically go, oh, Kiss, ew, and they wouldn't play it. So he brought it around and he blocked off the name of the band. Yep. He blocked off the vinyl so that you couldn't see what the name of the band was. And he was, oh, I got this new band. I got to play this for you. Just got this in. What do you think? And we loved the record. I was in Boston at the time. Loved the record. I'm like, I'd play this in a heartbeat. Which band is this? And he was like, well, it's Kiss. And I'm like, really? Okay. But anyway, so yeah, that was the conventional way. The record company signed a band. The radio stations were serviced by the record promoters based on the size of the market. If you were in a small market, they just mailed it to you. If you were in a bigger market, they actually came to see you once a week. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then there was this other way, and that was imports, particularly on album rock FM stations. They played a lot of songs that were a big deal in other countries, but hadn't been signed to the States yet necessarily. Kraftwerk and, some of the other, I'm completely blocking on some of the names of the bands, but there were a number of them that were really huge overseas, even some of the British bands that didn't have an American label yet. And we'd just send for them. We'd get in touch with a record store, remember record stores?
Oh, yeah.
And, pay the postage, and they would just send it to us. And Curved Air is another one that comes to mind, and various others. And we'd get them, and then we'd play them. And then if, in fact, we could create a little buzz, maybe an American label would sign them. And then there was how Rush happened. And how Rush happened was because of an act of kindness. And I've told this story before, but I think it's worth telling again. There was a guy named Bob Roper, and I'm still in touch with Roper to this day. Okay, he's long since out of the biz, but we still keep in touch. Roper was working for a record label called A&M of Canada. The A&M was Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, okay? And Herb Alpert had a big mellow jello hit called This Guy's in Love with You. He also had a band called the Tijuana Brass. They did a great song called The Lonely Bull, etc., etc. I mean, he was making money hand over fist, in other words. But he had a record label up in Canada. And the guys in Rush were this local Canadian band in Toronto. They played the clubs, and they did a homemade record on Moon Records, okay? And they played it, evidently, for Bob Roper at A&M of Canada. And lots of nothing.
He was out.
Roper was not ready for prime time. But Roper heard something. And he sent it down to me in a regular, just manila envelope, as I recall, with a note saying, we're not going to sign these guys. We just don't think they're ready. But he said, I hear something. And I've seen them play, and I hear something. Tell me what you think. And he didn't have to do that. They had already passed. He wasn't going to get a dime for doing this, okay? It wasn't like there's a signing bonus and he gets his fair share. Nothing. They had already said, no, we're not signing them. But he sent it down to me. And the moment I heard Working Man, I absolutely knew. Now, as I've said many times before, I didn't know that we'd become friends for 4 decades. I didn't know that I'd still be in touch with Roper years later. I didn't know that the guys would go on to have Umpty Fumpty Gold records and I'd be with them when they were on the Hollywood Walk of Fame or when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I was just a music director doing my job, and the record took off in Cleveland. Working Man became huge for us. So did Finding My Way and a few other songs from the album. The band got a record contract. They were signed to Mercury in the States. They went on to become wildly popular with all kinds of folks. And they kept in touch with me over the years, and I kept in touch with them. And I fought to get them a star on the Walk of Fame. And I fought to get them inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It wasn't just me. It was a group of us, but we were relentless. We loved them. We believed in them. And you know something? I'd do it again if I had to, because these are 3, God rest Neil's soul, but these are 3 of the nicest human beings you could ever meet. And I'm not just saying that because we're friends. I didn't know them back then. And what I can say is success never spoiled them. It never changed them. They were never the kinds of people that were like, don't you know who I am? I mean, they were just like really good guys. And I respect that about them, and I respect their music. And that's probably more than you ever wanted to know.
Oh, no.
You to tears, you're going to sleep over in the corner. Should I take that personally?
No, Carcass, are you kidding? I could listen to her talk all day.
No, and sometimes it's best just to keep one's mouth closed. I had some roommates, so that's why I'm listening with in awe. In fact, our buddy Henry Vasquez, who owns an actual record store, by the way, there's not a whole lot that he doesn't know, and he even said, "Wow!" So that's an interesting take. I had some Canadian roommates in college, and they were, Rush were their heroes, and one thing that they did mention is that it's hard for an American band, at least in this time, and we're talking about the 80s, it was harder for an American band to get Canadian airplay than it was for the Canadians to get American airplay. So the fact that
there's also an irony there, John. Up in Canada, the music industry was such that you didn't get any respect unless you had a hit in the United States. Now that's changed a little bit, okay? And there were some bands that just rejected that whole thing, like the Tragically Hip, who were perfectly happy to be popular only in Canada. Thank you very much. But by and large, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, and a whole, Burton Cummings, the Guess Who, Bachman Turner Overdrive, a whole host of others. If you didn't have a hit in the States, then suddenly it was like, oh, okay, up in Canada, you're all right. So a number of bands felt like they had to leave in order to become popular. And Rush, their success in America redounded to their benefit up in Canada.
Well, I think it fueled their success worldwide, because you gave them a chance, and it became like you striking a match on gasoline, and it just spread like wildfire. I think it's very interesting.
What music directors do. And the thing that I feel sad about, if Rush came along today, I couldn't do much for them. I still was in that era when radio ruled. Radio could make a hit. Radio could break a new artist. Radio could introduce people to music they hadn't heard before. And I mean, yeah, sure, radio's still out there and it's still in the mix, but that's the point. It's in the mix. It's one of a multitude of ways to hear new music. Back then, if you couldn't get radio airplay, and this made college radio really important. This made, FM radio really important. There are so many bands that owe their success to getting airplay on the radio. And it was just a golden time for that. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Did I ever get equal pay? No, I did not. Men always made more than me for doing the exact same work. And I'm not saying that to be bitter. I'm just saying, like, the culture on some levels tried to present itself as like very, we're moving forward. And some of the same old stuff remained.
Right.
So unfortunately, if you were looking to make the big bucks, it kind of didn't help you if you were female and wanted to make the big bucks. There were a few women that did well. But by and large, equal pay, sad to say, was not a thing. And the reality is, though, that I got to meet so many amazing people, okay? I'm not sitting here being bitter. I'm not sitting here being angry. Maybe I sound like I'm a whiner. I'm just stating a fact. There was no golden age. When people talk about, oh, yeah, let's bring back the good old days, I'm like, really? Because the good old days weren't so good for some people, okay? And for other people, well, maybe. If you were in the dominant group, then yeah, sure, it was great for you as you sat in your mansion and counted your money.
Right.
But what's interesting there is Neil and I had a talk about that one time. Neil Peart, God rest his soul. And Neil said to me, he said, the reason I shifted politically, and he was Canadian, so he couldn't vote in the States anyhow. But he said, like, I used to be like what you guys would call a conservative. He said, once I got out there more and saw that the playing field really wasn't level and that some people really weren't being given a fair chance. He said, yeah, we can relate. We can debate about the role of government. But he said, I really feel like we should help each other. And he said, I turned into a bleeding heart libertarian. I really did. He said, I'm still not eager to be in any one party, but I'm real clear that charity matters and that helping other people matters. And he said, that's a shift. And I think a lot of people haven't made that shift. I think they're still kind of coming from. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of people out there that could benefit from a kind word, that could benefit from being turned on to a great new song, that could benefit from somebody sharing something with them. And that's one of the things I kind of miss about the old days. There was more willingness from people to just collaborate, cooperate, put aside some of their differences and unite around music. The thing I loved the most about Rush is that their music brought people together from so many different ideologies. You had righties, you had lefties, you had centrists, you had religious people, you had atheists. But everyone could find a song they liked. Everyone could find some lyrics that spoke to them. I miss those days. I really do. And I really feel good about the fact when somebody gets in touch with me, because I'm pretty publicly center-left politically. Okay, I'm a little bit right on some things, a little bit center on some things, but generally I'm center-left, okay? And sometimes conservatives will get in touch with me and say, I don't agree with you politically, but we can all agree on Rush. And I'm like, yeah, that. Okay.
More of that. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you can just find something, there was a stupid top 40 song back in I think it was the 80s called Breakfast at Tiffany's. Okay. And I think you're smiling. You know the song I'm referring to.
Oh, yeah.
And well, I said, what about Breakfast at Tiffany's? And she said, yes, I remember that film. And I said, I recall we both kind of liked it. And I said, well, that's something we've got. And that's exactly where we are. Okay. If we can just find something that can bring us together in difficult times, that's better than fighting with each other.
So I want to ask you, one of the things
talking so much, I just
no. Oh my gosh, this is great. No.
This is by the word. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh, this is beautiful. I love it. One of the things that I didn't realize when I first learned about Rush, because the first song I heard, I think, was Tom Sawyer, because it got played on the radio. But where I really came into my Rush understanding was around the Signals album, because I bought New World Man 45, and then I went back. One of the things that I found odd was I didn't realize that Neil was not always the drummer. They had John Rutsey on the first album. Tell us a little bit about John Rutsey, because he was always kind of an enigma to me, because he appeared on the album and then Neil comes in and they go throughout this stellar career. Just tell us a little bit about the man.
Well, Neil came along in the summer of 74. But prior to that, and the guy that they played with in the clubs and the guy that was on the first Rush album was John Rutsey. And John Rutsey was a diabetic. Now, there have been rumors online, and I bat them down every time I see them, that he had a drug problem. He did not. He was a diabetic in that era before the modern world. Like today, if any of you are diabetics, what do? You take your little pen with you, you take everything, you just go and live your life and this and that. Couldn't do that back then. By and large, if you were a diabetic, in many cases, if you were severe diabetic, you had to go to the hospital every day to get treated, okay? Like outpatient. And the idea that you could be a rock and roll drummer and a diabetic. And John was a kid. He wasn't taking care of himself. He wasn't eating the right foods. And gradually, it became real obvious that he wasn't going to be healthy enough to do the kind of stuff that Rush needed to do. He was a pretty good basic 3-chord rock and roll drummer, okay? I mean, he was never going to make the world forget the best rock drummer who's ever lived, but he wasn't a slouch either, okay?
Right.
I mean, do what needed to be done. You and I talked off air the other day about Ringo Starr. He reminds me in that regard of Ringo. When Ringo first got started, it was like, ba-dum, 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 I'm asleep, But as time went on, Ringo started learning the art of drumming to the point where, to this day, there are people that say, don't underestimate that guy. Listen to some of the middle period Beatles stuff. Some of those backfills are like, that's Ringo? Well, yes, it is. Because he was always trying to improve. He was always trying to learn new things. And he really did grow as a drummer. Rutsey never got the chance to grow as a drummer. His illness really did take over his life. And in the end, there were two things that, and I don't want to speak for the band, but this has been in print for heaven's sake, and it happens to be true.
Sure.
The band kind of wanted to take a new direction anyway. And they sort of realized that John's health wasn't going to allow it to be possible. Plus, they needed somebody that could write more advanced lyrics, okay? Somebody that could take them to the next level. And they knew it. And ultimately, John left the band. Now, there are various stories about whose idea it was, but let's just say that John always felt like he got dealt a really bad hand. Okay. And some of it had nothing to do with the band. I mean, that's just the way health was back in those days. if he were living today, he could be a pro athlete, for heaven's sake. He could be a marine biologist. He could be anything you wanted to be, because diabetes doesn't have to stop you. They've got all kinds of easy to take treatments. None of it was easy back then. And as a result, his career as a rock and roller outside of Toronto was going to be a problem. So he left the band. And I'm sure he was bitter about it, and I'm sure he was angry about it. Not necessarily angry at the guys, but like I said, angry at the hand that he was dealt. Mm-hmm. And they didn't forget about him. But in the end, Neil was a better fit for the next thing that they needed and for where they wanted to go. And that's exactly what happened. And I wonder if Neil was kind of amused that one of the most popular songs the band had was Always Working Man. And to some degree, that was kind of a little tribute to John Rutsey.
Right.
In peace.
Yeah. Well, so
in peace as well.
I appreciate you sharing that with us, because I knew when you and I talked the other day, what I thought versus what you knew were two different things about John Rutsey. And so I appreciated you sharing.
What did you hear?
Well, the same rumors, like you had said, and they touched on it in the documentary for a while, but I just enjoyed, someone that knew him and met him. I just enjoyed hearing you talk about what kind of a person he was. So
I only met him once. And like I said, I was pretty aware that it was problematic for him to travel outside of Toronto. Gotcha.
So you get the record and you start playing Working Man on Cleveland radio. Am I right?
That is correct. WMX.
Okay. How do you actually meet and get to know Rush and form that relationship that has lasted 40 plus years?
Well, they have this amazing thing called the telephone.
Yes.
And back in those days, people used it. Okay. So it was a thing. I mean, I got one right here. It's a thing. Yeah. And all joking aside, I communicated with the record promoters by telephone. This is what you did. So when we started getting requests for that Rush album, we had one of it. Okay. If it got scratched, if it got damaged, we would have none of it. And by the way, that's not a secret signal to certain people out there. That's just a zero. Okay. Because in the world today,
you never know.
You just never know. So
it's like this. If you turn it this way, it's something. It's
the Power Pig salute. Yes, indeed.
Somebody's going to be mad.
Oh gosh.
Oh, I know. This is the world we're living in, kids.
Yeah.
So, that having been said, so we were playing it, and I realized very quickly as a music director, we have one of these, okay? And that's never a good place to be in. So I remember vaguely, I think I called Roper, and I was like, how do I get a hold of them? And, because what's Moon Records, And he knew their manager. So I think he gave me their number. And so I called up the managers. They had two of them back then. Later, they would only have one, Vic Wilson and Ray Daniels. And I believe it was Vic that I was able to get a hold of. And I said, your record is a big deal in Cleveland. And he was like, it is? How did it get to Cleveland? We can't get arrested in Toronto, And I was like, well, Bob Roper sent it down to us. And we're like, you guys are big here now, okay? And I need more copies of your record. I really do. He's like, I'll send you some. And then I get a phone call from a guy named Peter Schlewin, God rest his soul, who ran the big store that had imports. Remember I said some stations played stuff from England and stuff from Germany and stuff from, wherever. And we had a reputation for that too. So Peter Schlewin, who sells imports at a store called Record Revolution, he calls and he's like, can you get me some? And I'll sell them. I'm like, I'll put you in touch with the management. So long story short, they got sent down a box of records, Record Revolution sold out of them. And the next thing you know, American record companies are calling because WMMS was a big deal. And we reported to trade publications like Billboard and Record World and various others. And people read them like, oh, you guys are doing real well with this record. That's what you did before the internet. And today it's all online. But they were like, oh, you're doing real well with this. Okay, terrific. What label are they on? They're not. Oh, unsigned band. Suddenly everybody wants to sign them. And they ultimately signed with Mercury Records, where a friend of mine, Cliff Bernstein, signed them and promised me that he would treat them right and give them a lot of promotion. And on we go. They came down. They did a couple of gigs down in Cleveland. It was great to see them. And they did a live broadcast from the Agora Ballroom. When they did the live version of Working Man, they gave me a shout out, and et cetera, and et cetera. The American version of the record, the one that you have, is actually the Canadian version with an ugly fuchsia cover as opposed to a sort of red cover, and with the lines added at the bottom, with special thanks to Donna Halper for getting the ball rolling. And I was really surprised they did that.
I've got to put my glasses on.
But this was so typical of the guys. I mean, they were just very compassionate people, and they were grateful. I never knew back then that we would become friends, but we did. And yes, it says right there, you know, with special thanks to Donna Halper of WMMS in Cleveland for getting the ball rolling.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
First album that it was ever dedicated to me. And they dedicated the second one to me as well, which I was grateful for. And then, of course, I was in the documentary, and et cetera, and et cetera.
That was very cool.
And we did become friends.
Let me ask you one more thing, because we want to be very respectful of your time, but I have my copy. Do you still have yours?
Absolutely.
Do you
It
have
is downstairs wrapped in plastic. I will never part with it. I will never sell it. It is like I take it out. I take it out every now and then when I'm giving speaking engagements so that people can see the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Okay. And also so that people can see an actual artifact of rock and roll history. If you look behind you in my messy office, this is orderly chaos. What those piles are piles of artifacts that I use in my research. I write extensively. I try to keep the stories alive of the people that influenced our lives so much. And believe it or don't, not everything is digitized. And so what I do back in the pre-pandemic days is I would go out to the flea markets and various other places and just kind of rescue stuff that people were going to toss, but to me, it's gold, and I don't want anything to happen to it. And, you know, I treat it with respect. Let me just grab something off frame here for a second if I can find it. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. But for example, here I have, now this will mean nothing to anyone, but it means something to me. See this? Now, yes. I know what you're thinking. It's a ratty old book, Don. Yeah, except it's a ratty old book from 1925, and it's a diary. People back then loved radio so much that they listened and they wrote down what they heard. This is an actual listing of the stuff that some listener heard that night. And what they thought of it, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, what they thought of it, what stations they heard. I mean, this is gold for someone like me, okay? Mm-hmm. Because this is like, here's somebody who was there when radio was 4 years old, okay? I'm not reading about this like years later from somebody that was never there and they basically read about it. I'm like, I've got the actual thing, okay? Yeah. Or I'll tell you one more. This is a book about WWJ, which is still on the air. It was written a year and a half after radio was born.
Wow.
Okay? By the people who founded the radio station. Okay?
Man,
so
that is cool.
all behind me are artifacts from 100 years of broadcasting and the music industry and different genres. So when someone says to me, hey, what do you know about name this group or this band? I can go to the actual artifacts and look and see what did people back then think about them and how has that changed over the years. So it's kind of a privilege for me to preserve the history of my industry. And I know it looks chaotic, but believe it or don't, I know where everything is. And I continue to try to preserve it. But yeah, I touch the original Rush album very seldom because, like anything else, it's very fragile. I don't want anything to happen to it.
No,
and I will cherish it all the days of my life because knowing Rush changed my life. Now, I hope I'm not boring your listeners because I know people in the audience mostly do like metal and, how come we're not talking about this band or that band? So you've been nothing but nice to me and I appreciate the opportunity and I don't want to overstay my welcome.
No, not at all, Donna. We talk all things classic rock, hard rock, heavy metal. You are welcome anytime. If you find a cool artifact that you want to share, you call me or message me. The next time I am in Boston, I can tell you this. I'm going to send you a message and I'm going to try and take you to lunch. And maybe you could just show me the Rush record through the window, maybe, or something. Because
I showed you a picture.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
I have pictures of it with me and a couple of fans. When Beyond the Lighted Stage came out, I did bring it out to the premiere. And I do have pictures of it. But yeah, at some point in time, if you want me to take it out and show it to you and you can just...
Yeah, and we would.
Yes, we would.
Carlos, what have you got for the great Donna Halper?
Well, the irony is without bands like Rush and that early crossover from through the 60s into the 70s, I mean, there probably wouldn't be heavy metal as we know it. In fact, I'm a little older than Rob, just a little bit older. And so I had the fortune to see some of the greats. In fact, I came in on the Rush train. The first song I ever heard was Bastille Day, and then worked my way backwards and thought, wow, it really sounds different, but I still love it. And then I've been hooked ever since. But my parents used to deem Rush heavy metal, and but so was Aerosmith and Ted Nugent. So I couldn't ever figure that out. But without those types of bands, obviously we wouldn't have the movement towards a heavier or a faster sound. And even Rush to the point, they played things in a manner that inspired others to play faster, to play more technically a sound, and to do other things. And so they had something that nobody else had, and it's amazing without people like you that actually gave them the opportunity to expand their horizons in another country that ended up being a stepping stone to the rest of the world. I think it's amazing. Fantastic.
Yeah, without you paying attention, they could have just skipped right off the atmosphere like a million other bands. And so we are certainly thankful that you paid attention and that you dropped the needle on Working Man.
And I'm very grateful that you guys have the kind of show that you have, because this is a labor of love. I'm sure you're not making the big bucks. I'm sure you basically get paid.
Some people are making.
He's a millionaire and everybody knows it. But I mean, besides that, but all joking aside, these are the kinds of things that you do just for the love of the music.
Mm-hmm.
Like people have said to me, well, did you get a finder's fee? I'm like, a finder's fee? I got a 45-year friendship. How lucky am I? Okay.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't be talking to nice folks like you. And I mean that sincerely. I mean, there would be nobody that would be asking me on their podcast, their webcast, or any other kind of casts if it weren't for my career in broadcasting and some of the bands that I was able to play and some of the folks I would be able to meet. But none of it changed my life like Rush did. And it is a privilege to be able to come and talk about the band and also to give it my proper respect, which I will do forever. And it's so nice to meet some fans who are willing to set genres aside, because maybe you got a show about metal, but I mean, you know what? It's all music.
It is.
It brings people together. I'm all for it. Gentlemen, I got to go do something else entirely because I teach 4 classes tomorrow and I got to get ready for that. So
thank you, Donna, so much. Oh my gosh.
I hope I was okay.
Oh,
you were beyond okay. You were fantastic. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Not so bad yourself.
Thank you again.
Do I get the show T-shirt? I mean, come on.
If I have any, I'll send you one, but I think we're completely out of T-shirts. But check this out. We do one thing to sign off the show, and we give the metal horns, and we say metal will prevail. You may join us, but you don't have to. Carcass, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, Donna, thank you again so much. And until next time, metal will prevail.
And I will just do the music will prevail.
Yes.
Because if you don't have music in your life, what have you got?
You got
perfect.
A lot of quiet time. That's no good.
That's it. A lot of quiet riot.
Thank you again.
Amen, Donna. Thank you.